I'm reading Matthew chapter 8, starting with verse 18. This is part of my devotion today. Anyway, now when Jesus saw a crowd around him, he gave orders to depart to the other side of the sea. Then a scribe came and said to him, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." There's probably some little interesting thing about the fact that it mentions that he was a scribe. I don't know what it is, though, so moving on. Jesus said to him, "The foxes have holes, and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." And then another of the disciples said to him, "Lord, permit me to go and bury my father." But Jesus said to him, "Follow me, and allow the dead to bury their own dead." That seems a little callous of Jesus, doesn't it? I think we need to give Jesus credit for probably knowing a little bit more of the situation. He probably knew that, look, I'm a bus driver, so I like to use this illustration a lot, but hey, the train is leaving the station. Are you on or are you not? In other words, stop making excuses. Let's get on board. I may be wrong in that commentary, but that's the way I see it. And Jesus said, he said, "Follow me, allow the dead to bury their own dead." Then he got into the boat. Now, it's interesting to kind of color this conversation a little bit. He said there was the crowd around him. They were beginning to press in. He gave orders, "Let's go to the other side of the sea." And so it was in transition. They were moving. The disciples were getting the boat ready. And the scribe comes up to him and says, "I will follow you wherever you go." And then another disciple says, "Let me go bury my father." I really do wonder about that one. So let me go bury my father before we go to the other side of the sea. But anyway, this was all kind of like a conversation. We tend to look at these things as they're kind of framed in little static things, and they're not. Jesus is on the move. Someone taps him on the shoulder, and he looks back, and has this conversation or whatever. He's moving onto the boat. So finally they get on the boat. And it says his disciples followed him on. So he was first on. The disciples followed him in. And behold, there arose a great storm on the sea. I love this story. So there arose a great storm on the sea, so that the boat was being covered in waves. Not just a little, sailing trip across the lake. But Jesus himself was asleep, it says in verse 24. 25, now this is important. 25, they came to him and woke him, saying, they had to wake him up. In other words, the waves couldn't wake him up. The disciples woke him up. They were saying, "Save us, Lord, we are perishing." And he said to them, "Why are you afraid, you men of little faith?" Then he got up, rebuked the winds and the sea, and it became perfectly calm. And the men were amazed and said, "What kind of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him?" You know, this is an interesting illustration that, look, the number one safest place in the universe is wherever Jesus is. You know, I mean, the world could have fallen apart around them, and it would have been better to be in that boat than anywhere else on the face of the earth. Now, it is interesting to me that they came to him and they said, Lord, save us, or save us, Lord, we are perishing. So they knew that he was the guy to go to, and that probably he could do something. So they had a little faith. But they didn't take note of the fact that, look, Jesus is asleep. Now, he was following his own advice. He was saying, be anxious for nothing, and all that. He was putting, as they like to say, shoe leather on his own teaching. In other words, he was practicing what he preached. He was being anxious for nothing. And he didn't need to be, because they weren't in trouble. But they didn't know that. Totally amazing story. And they were amazed and said, what kind of man is this that even the winds and the sea obey him? And it is interesting. They didn't come to him and say, hey, are you going to help us out here? They knew he was the Lord. And yet they still weren't getting it. But when he rebuked the winds and the sea, it says it became perfectly calm. He heard their prayer. It is interesting to me too, though, that even with that little of faith, he responded to their prayer. We tend to get into a frame of mind that God likes to say no a lot more than he likes to say yes. And I don't think that's true. I think he honors whatever little faith that we have. Even if it's smaller than that of the grain of mustard seed, of a mustard seed. They weren't getting it, and yet he heard them anyway. And then used it as a teachable moment. Anyway, that's my little devotion for today in my stream of consciousness commentary. Have a good day.